Hi, folks. This is Adrian, co host and producer of the Allison Supply Chains podcast. I had a great holiday break. So great, in fact, that I messed up when recording this episode of the podcast. I did not have video recording enabled, so we only captured the audio for this episode. If you listen to an audio only version of this podcast, carry on. Nothing to see here, as usual. But for those that view the podcast in video form, even though this episode is missing what our cameras should have captured, there's still a lot of fun memes and Easter eggs to look out for throughout the episode. My sincerest apologies, and I promise you'll get to see our faces again on the next episode. Hello and welcome to the Allison Supply Chains podcast. This is the first episode of 2026, starting our second year of this podcast. Every month, this podcast covers the latest news concerning third-party security posture management and digital supply chain risk. We pick a few of the industry's most interesting stories each month and discuss them. This podcast accompanies the very popular Allison Supply Chains newsletter, which covers a lot more ground, so be sure to check that out and join 15,460 other subscribers, and you can read that also every month. It goes into a lot more detail. To subscribe, go to tenchi click on Insights and News, and then Alice in Supply Chain's newsletter. Also, if you're listening to this, why not subscribe to this podcast? You're already here. The button's right there. You can just click it. And we'd also love to hear your feedback, so take a moment and leave us a review and a comment. All right, let's get the show started. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, founder of the Defenders Initiative, and joining me is Alexandre Sierra, the CTO and co-founder of Tenchi Security. How are you doing?
I'm fine. Super happy to be here. Feeling refreshed after the end of the years.
So, the vibe check here. It's. I get irritated when people do predictions, and the prediction is just an observation of what's happening now, and it's going to happen more next year, right? Like those are my. I can't stand those predictions, but that's exactly how I feel coming into 2026. Though with AI, I am hoping to talk about AI less, but I do think this is going to be the year where AI has to prove its worth. I think it's, as we say here, put up or shut up time. So the demo looked great. How do we make it work at scale for our entire enterprise, right? Some of these enterprise use cases. I think clearly it's going to stick around as a advisory tool, as an assistant. And clearly it's going to stick around for code. It seems to have completely transformed software engineering. And even there, I was kind of negative about it. But my partner just built her own productivity app, really richly featured productivity app. She wasn't fully happy with Notion. She wasn't fully happy with a lot of these other tools she was using. And in 4 days had a fairly bug-free, you can actually, I'm not going to include the link because that's a little too random for this podcast. But you could go create an account and use it. It's public.
Absolutely also very skeptical of most predictions. I actually want to recommend listeners go check out your other podcast, Enterprise Security Weekly, where you had an entire episode about predictions, and you do the unthinkable. You go back to last year's prediction about 2025, the 2024 prediction about 2025, and you check out which ones panned out or not, which is something people forget to do. Like a lot of people just throw out predictions into the wind and anyone never goes back to check them. About AI, it's about time we find what it actually does well and what it doesn't do well, and there's plenty of both. But the wisdom is in telling the difference. And I think the way I think about it is like 3D printers, but a very easy to use 3D printer. You can do a lot with it. It's like a Swiss Army knife. It's very flexible. But does that mean people don't need factories anymore?
Right.
Not really. Does that mean we don't have to have things built out of steel anymore? Not really. So again, when you're doing something for yourself, when you're doing something simple, when you're doing a prototype, when you're doing research, but you will use that as an input and then actually do the research and structure things, it can be immensely useful and save you a ton of time. Does it do the job by itself and entirely replace humans? Heck no.
Hmm.
But that's the thing, the mistake business leaders and marketing people keep making, and we're going to have to learn the hard way, right? And to me, the
Yeah.
biggest question is not so much will people land on like the trough of disillusionment, but when that happens, I'm hoping as soon as possible. And how much damage will that do to the global economy, given how much money has been
Hmm.
poured into realistic expectations of the revenue that this thing will generate, and what the impact this will have on the entire planet, right?
Yeah, I like the comparison to 3D printing. I think that's a really apt comparison. Like we might see a point where that grows. You know, I've seen some prototypes of 3D printers that can also produce the electronics as well, like print the PCB. You know, you know the circuits, place the components with like little robotic arms and stuff like that. So I don't know, maybe another 10 years and that becomes you know, consumer grade. But yeah, the economic side of it, that's the scary part for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are ready for RAM prices and disk prices already. You know, it's only been 3 months that it's gone crazy, but I think people are already ready for that to go back to normal. So even more people are excited to see the AI bubble burst so that they
Yeah.
can upgrade their systems and buy new laptops at reasonable prices. The other thing I was thinking about is as the United States, my country, talks about taking Greenland, is that balkanization is accelerating this year. So we do have a couple stories that are um, maybe adjacent to that. You know, we're seeing some new regulations, but yeah, it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better, I think.
It's a recurring theme we've been covering on the newsletter here at the podcast. And I think it has both of those topics, both AI and the balkanization, have direct impacts on TPCRM. We've discussed them a little bit, but it's getting harder and harder to rely or to have dependence on US for national security purposes or even for critical infrastructure purposes, given the possibility now that that dependence will be weaponized for economic or political interests, where it wasn't in the past, where the relationship was very benign and very win-win. Regardless of whether you think this is a good strategy from the US or not, from the other country's perspective, this is bad, right? And so we're seeing
Mhm.
more and more efforts to adjust and reduce that dependency, which will hurt everyone. Whereas before it was win-win, now it's going to be lose-lose, essentially, right? Which is a shame.
Yeah. And some of it's posturing, like China just made a list of cybersecurity, U.S. and Israeli cybersecurity vendors that Chinese companies are not allowed to work with. And most of those companies kind of put their hand up and said, we've never done business in China. So, like, this is zero impact to us. So, like, some of it's posturing, you know, but also China is turning down H200 video cards after like just getting the right to buy them back again from the U.S. So you know, a lot of the messaging I'm getting here is China's telling, you know, the Western supply chain, maybe we don't need you anymore. So I think that's kind of an interesting shift.
And the rumor is they don't need those because they're buying the more expensive, more complex stuff through intermediaries, which were never sanctioned. And so,
Hmm.
okay, my needs are already being met in other ways, right? The same way that we've sanctioned like Russian oil sales, but Russia
Hmm.
is selling oil to someone maybe at a discount, so maybe it's slightly more expensive. But like China is buying their GPUs, right? They're not without GPU by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, yeah. All right. You had two announcements here. We've got a special episode coming up with Tony Martin-Vegue. I assume, is it pronounced vague?
That's how I pronounce it, at
We
least
will
for the
find
Martin.
out how it's pronounced.
We will. Friend of the show, just friend in general, amazing person, Tony Martin-Vegue, very seasoned GRC professional, leaning very heavily into cyber risk quantification these days, and we're good friends, even though I'm a bit of a CRQ skeptic, so I think it's going to be an
Yeah.
interesting discussion, especially understanding what CRQ can bring to the table as far as third-party cyber risk management. He has a book coming up, so I'd love to talk about that as well. Super smart person, one of the kindest people in information security. So I think it's going to benefit everyone. Really looking forward to recording and releasing that. Don't miss it.
Yeah, I've been reading up on some of his stuff, and I'm really enjoying his writing. So looking forward to the book as well. Also, RSA is coming.
Right, this is where the brace yourselves Game of Thrones meme should come up. Like brace yourselves, RSA is coming. So you have a talk to prepare, and there's a deadline looming for the first version, right?
It is.
I have a talk to prepare as well. That's why I'm also concerned about this. Tenchi is going to do a lot of activities. We're building like going to be at Harlan Records the entire week. If anyone wants to come and visit,
That sounds fun.
It is. It's a great place, very close to Union Square there. So from Sunday to Wednesday, we're going to have different events each night, and essentially it's going to be mostly geared towards like Latin American CISOs and practitioners, but of course open to all. Everyone's welcome to come, and it's going to be super exciting. A lot of work is going into that already. The marketing team is working in overdrive to make this a success. So
Awesome. All right, and with that, let's jump into story number one. This was I have a love-hate relationship with surveys. I used to field a lot of surveys when I was an industry analyst at 451 Research, but always interesting to see, especially when they share enough data, like how they asked a question, that kind of thing. So ENISA, which I'm not going to be able to figure out the acronym off the top of my head. Let me pull this up here. Basically, the EU cybersecurity organization collected 1,080 surveys from professionals representing organizations across the EU, and it looked like exactly 40 from each of the 27 companies, 27 countries that were represented here. So pretty good sample set. And this is based off of NIS2 investments, which NIS2 I think is the second version of the EU cybersecurity standard, right?
yeah, which mandates a baseline level of security controls for most companies, for a decent subset of companies. So the two main regulations that impact cybersecurity in the EU are NIS2 and DORA, right? And DORA is very much specific, very much focused on critical infrastructure, whereas NIS is more broad. So very interesting analysis. And the caveat here for anyone looking at surveys, which is I always also share a concern about surveys, but if they are done by not by a vendor, for example, that is trying to push their own agenda, they're done by an independent organization, there's a better hope that this will be more less biased. And it measures perceptions. It does not measure reality. That's the thing we always have to keep in mind when we're talking about surveys. And we know how perceptions sometimes deviate like very strongly from reality. But if you're working in marketing, if you're working in policy building, if you're working in a variety of areas of interest, knowing what the perceptions are, what people's preferences are, is super important. That's why surveys do have their value. But let's keep that in mind, because people make that mistake a lot.
That's why they say perceptions are reality. Like absolutely, when you're in sales and marketing.
Yes.
Sadly, most folks don't buy based off reality. They buy based off their perceptions, with all biases intact. So every year it seems that whoever puts together this survey, I think you said maybe it's a third party, plants some seeds and grows a batch of stacked bar graphs. And man, what quite the crop this year that they got from.
Yes,
so many stacked bars.
Make sure you get your reading glasses, maybe magnifying lenses, to read some of those stacked charts. So such great work, such bad data visualization, like it hurts. It hurts. It's we have
27. I mentioned 27 countries. Each one is represented by a bar, and then in some of these cases, like maybe 16 data points deep for each of those 27. So you can visually see, the differences. It's good for visually seeing some of it, but there's way too much.
Yes.
You do need you do need maybe a magnifying glass for this one.
Yes. They cover a lot of super interesting ground that I think will be interesting for folks to read. For us that either are a vendor or are talking to vendors all the time, it's certainly very interesting. But I think also trying to understand what the motivations are for what other companies are doing as far as their investment and priorities, and thinking, hey, does that match my reality as well? Like, especially if you are in Europe or planning on starting to operate in Europe, I think it's a
Yeah.
good document to read.
So let's we don't have time to go into all of them that I've pasted into our notes here, but I think we should pick out a few. I found it interesting that Estonia, which is like kind of a digital first country, was felt like they were the worst prepared and they were the slowest to patch. Like they fell behind in ways that I wouldn't expect, given their reputation.
I agree. That was also rather surprising, even though seeing that patching is a pain for every single country out there
Mm-hmm.
was not surprising at all, because that's the
Mm-hmm.
experience everyone has everywhere across the board, right? Um, a few things that caught my attention as well is that when they're talking about investment drivers for last year, they're talking mostly compliance and customer security requirements are kind of leading the way. Very little impact on requirements imposed by cyber insurance companies or insurance companies in general, which I think tracks rather well with the discussion we had on the last episode that like I think both of us were very optimistic in the past about the role that cyber insurance would have in driving cybersecurity investments,
Yeah.
like PCI did for retail and other legislation did, but that it's actually not working. And the working theory is that there's so much competition between cyber insurers, and so the purchasing power, the power is right now at the hands of the cyber insurance buyer. So
Mm-hmm.
insurers are not being able to impose as much as
Yeah.
we would like as security professionals to make sure risk management is implemented. And I think this graph is kind of reflecting that, right? So that caught my attention.
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe it's just early. Maybe that'll change over time as it becomes more commoditized, and everybody's doing cyber insurance the same way. If that ever happens, it may never settle down. Who knows? But yeah. Let's see what else here. So
Most
supply
challenging
chain.
requirements to implement. Yeah. So
Okay.
TPRM is consistently number two, right after vulnerability management. Again, that tracks, and I feel every listener here right now that works with TPRM nodding heavily as we say that,
Yeah.
right? So that's also not a surprise, but it's actually to see that measured. Um, the supply chain risk management practices implemented was also super interesting, right? So you see that the most frequent one is conducting supplier risk assessments or
Look
audits.
at us both squinting here at these graphs.
Old man, screams at graph. So including cybersecurity requirements in supplier contracts, amazingly, like 30 something percent at most companies doing that, which really surprised me. Like only 30 something percent of companies adding cybersecurity requirements in contracts. And then you see maintaining a register of suppliers as under 10% for all countries. So, like, who knew, like, inventory management of anything was hard, right? Some of those companies had thousands or tens of thousands of suppliers. Just keeping track of who all of them are and making sure you know who the critical ones are, a huge challenge. And this graph shows this, like, very, very clearly. So yeah, this is the same depressing view that we get when we do the survey ourselves with our customers. How
Oh, really?
difficult it is to keep track of just keeping an inventory, auditing everyone. Yeah. So it's one of the things that keeps me back thinking we need to disrupt the way we're doing TPRM. Like what we're doing does not scale, right? This screams what we're doing is not scaling enough that we can't even keep track of all the third
It's
parties
a
we need to keep track of.
yeah, same reason vulnerability management is up there, right? The quantity is just too high. It's just too much data to worry about. Prioritization becomes important, right?
Yeah. So the what's driving cybersecurity investment? So number one with 70% is regulatory compliance requirements, NIS2 and DORA and CRA. So that's what dominates the graph. Twice as much as proactive risk mitigation, which we would hope would be number one. People are doing risk management and they're deciding what they need to do in order to meet their risk appetite. That's a
Mm-hmm.
far second. So compliance was 70%, and then that like proactive risk management is 42%. The answer to life, the universe, and everything. And then supply chain requirements, security requirements is like 29% right after that. I'm assuming that means like I'm a third party and I have to implement the things that my first party required of me. So it's right there on the top three, right? So that's
Yeah, and
super
then
interesting.
I found uh, attacks with the greatest operational impact on day-to-day operations was interesting to contrast with what people are most concerned about going forward. Because the greatest operational impacts, I was surprised to find, was denial of service over ransomware. Um, and then supply chain compromise came in, I think, in fifth place there. And then, but when you look at what they're worried about next year, they're not worried about denial of service. They're most worried about ransomware, and supply chain attacks is just behind it, number two.
And the reason I think most security professionals are not as concerned with denial of service, my view on this, but this is not on the report. This is more of an IT question. This is more about capacity planning, being able to auto scale,
Mm,
being able to hire a good CDN. So it's not under the purview of security. And then if you ask a security person, what are you most concerned about? They're going to be concerned about the things they have to work on,
yeah,
right? Whereas maybe DDoS mitigation is tangential to security, but I think who's going to be
but
like
there's
actually
no
doing the
work for them
work.
to do. Yeah, yeah. Use
You,
a third party to try and block it and deal with it, but yeah, there's not really new controls you put in place or anything like that. Like it's pretty straightforward. How you deal with DDoS attacks tends to be somewhat simple compared to the problem of ransomware, which there's a million different ways that can happen to you.
yep, yep. How do you combat ransomware? Make security good. Like, don't be hacked.
Simple.
Simple, right? You
Yeah.
just have this laundry list of all the CIS critical security controls to tend to. Why are we worried? That's simple.
Follow for more simple tips.
And then if you look at things that people are more concerned about, you're absolutely right. Like number one is ransomware. And then number two is supply chain attacks, which is the topic we're talking about here. So again, very close to the top of concerns is third-party risk. And when they say supply chain attacks, they might be merging third-party risk with software supply chain security problems. I see
Mm-hmm.
those conflated very, very frequently, but still, it's been a top concern. And that number on the high 40% is there. Like 47% are concerned about supply chain attacks. Again, same as the the percentage of claims of cyber insurance related to third-party incidents, same as the 2024 World Economic Forum estimation that 40-something% of material impacts came from an incident that involved a third party. You see that 40%, 50-40% range floating around very consistently across very different reports, which also caught
Mm-hmm.
my attention.
It's interesting that they've broken out insecure or untrusted hardware slash software components from supply chain attacks. So the way
Mm,
what I take that to mean is number two there, supply chain attacks. That's an attack directly against your supplier. Whereas insecure, untrusted, that's more the like move
soft supply chain.
AMZ, yeah, stuff that I bought from a supplier but put in my environment. and I'm
Yeah,
not sure how secure it is or not. That's how
makes
I'm
sense.
reading into that. Yeah.
Makes sense.
And denial of service is the very last thing on that list. But the first thing on the previous list. I mean, I think we explained it pretty well, but it's still kind of funny to see it inverted like that. This episode is brought to you by Zanshin, the innovative SaaS solution for third-party cyber risk management that's disrupting the market with a cooperative, continuous, and comprehensive approach. Zanshin is the first product to allow first parties to gain true visibility into their third parties in a non-intrusive way. Gain a deep understanding of how secure your third parties are in key areas like cloud security, endpoint security, identity and access management, and at-risk encryption. Visit Tenchi at tenchisecurity.com to schedule a demo or free trial and see for yourself how enterprise customers are able to reduce third-party risk by 80% or more in just a few weeks. All right, moving on to story number 2. This is a spicy one. We're going to have some disclaimers here. So there have been some SOC 2 fraud accusations in the industry. We've seen it on LinkedIn. We've seen it on Reddit. But notably, I went out and looked for it. I haven't seen the media cover it. And I think there could be a few different reasons for that. I think maybe there's just not enough evidence for a journalist to be willing to write it up and put their name behind it. Or it could mean that
it's not as sensational a story as someone getting hacked, right, in the North Korea. I don't think it's such a sexy a story to interested journalists. Not that no one being interested is rather surprising, but I would already expect the level of interest to be super low, because it's not something that I would think the general public or even like most IT folks would even understand.
It would require a lot of explaining. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But for people in a specific niche, it's very spicy. And I don't know. Media can get pretty niche. There's some niche outlets out there. I would have thought somebody would have covered it, but the other possibility here, which requires another unproven accusation, is that lawyers get involved with this kind of thing, and they can be used to try and suppress too much talk of this with cease and desist notices.
Yes.
So that is a thing that has happened. So we just don't have a whole lot of data here. Basically, what was leaked was a Google Sheet or a Google Drive link that linked to a bunch of SOC 2s. The SOC 2s themselves you could not look at. There was access control on those, but the main Google Sheet that listed all those SOC 2s was anyone with the link can view this. So we were able to see, if I recall, the names of the companies were in the file names or in that Google Sheet. So that was kind of bad. That was kind of a bit of a breach. I would expect with a compliance vendor, somebody that helps me get a SOC 2 quickly, that they would try and keep some of that data private. And in fact, there has been some ambulance chasing in the industry. I saw at least one company saying, "Hey, the real story here are Google Sheets shared to anyone with a link, and we can help you with that problem." So they,
nice.
they made it all about the the data leak.
Yeah, and so the claim here was made was that essentially there was because we did have a special episode in July, which seems rather prescient now, with AJ on about how SOC 2s actually work, and I learned a ton from AJ in that conversation, and I would recommend everyone go back and listen to that episode because it's going to give you a ton of context. And AJ was already saying that this was going on, so the claim here lines up pretty well with something that AJ said was happening. So we don't have any direct evidence, and we're not saying this is happening, but I think this is more along the lines of there's chatter in the industry about the same thing that AJ said. He had seen more people coming online and publishing stuff saying they've seen it, because there were comments on the Reddit thread, there were comments on the Troyfine LinkedIn post saying, yeah, I checked a couple of the SOC 2s from some of those companies. They're on the list. And essentially the claim is there's a compliance automation platform, or more than one, that are essentially, they partnered up with auditors that are essentially rubber stamping the reports without checking anything, to the point where some of the SOC 2 reports are identical except for the company name that was audited, or maybe a couple of details, right? And the main problem is there's very little way that first parties that are consuming those reports to know about this, because the SOC 2 reports are not public. There's no public repo where you could go and check if there are other identical. There's not. This simply doesn't exist, unless you happen to have audited, assessed more than one of those companies, and you were explicitly looking for duplicates. That's it. There's very little in the way of a QA process or a disciplinary process that the AICPA maintains. And we go at length on the conversation we're going on, talking about how poor and how lenient and how lax and open to manipulation or shenanigans their peer review process is, which is the only fig leaf they have of saying we're maintaining some sort of standard. But even that process doesn't look at the actual audit itself, only like at the record keeping and the methodology, but not, did you actually check this control properly, right? Do your findings actually match reality? There's no checking of that. So we don't even know if this were true, would any consequence occur to that platform or to those auditors? Yeah. So far, nothing has happened. AICPA, as far as I know, hasn't even acknowledged that this thing is a thing. So again, I think it's a reminder of just how bad the SOC 2 ecosystem is. And what I keep telling people is, I see TPRM teams consuming SOC 2s that don't understand how the sausage is made, and how unreliable that information is, how much that information is under the control of the third party. And they're putting a lot of weight into this that probably isn't warranted. It's not useless, but I think it's way less useful and reliable than most TPRM teams think. So that's why we bring this up. It's like a warning call. Educate yourself. And then if you want to use this, of course, like, I sympathize with TPRM teams trying to use whatever information they have at their disposal, right? Because it's a hard job. They have to do it fast, and they have all sorts of restrictions. But just understand how much you can trust or not trust this before you use it.
Yeah, I think, this is kind of the natural direction that these things go. It's as predictable as gravity, that any certification process where there's not any kind of active prosecution of or prevention of abuse of that certification standard, it's going to get abused, right? There's somebody who's going to come in with the easy one-click get certified button. Back in 2019, me and Harun Mir did a whole talk that kind of centered around fake awards and things like that. We talked about a lot of different
the security products we deserve. That's a great talk. You should look it up on YouTube. The security products we deserve. I love that talk, by the way.
I'll add that to the show notes here. I've been making notes of things to add as we go through. But and so that's what this is turning into. And there's a lot of CISOs out there put a lot of work into their SOC 2s. They kind of put their heart into it. They're very proud of it once they finish the process. It can be a grueling process. And if somebody else out there can get the same stamp, get the same label on their website, with 1/100th of the effort, it's kind of an insult to the ones that spend a lot of time and work on it. So this hurts the certification overall, and AICPA needs to do something about it, or it just degrades the quality and the value of their product, and eventually it will drive towards people not getting SOC 2s anymore, because it's going to tarnish the image of it. And I just wanted to mention, this did happen in PCI. shortly after PCI came out, rubber stamping was happening. There's a part, if you look at the full PCI ROC, there is a place where the auditor has to put in their comments about every individual, almost, I would think probably over 300 requirements today, about how it was achieved. You have to write some kind of comment in there. And there were QSA firms that were just putting their logo in that field and just stamp. So like literal digital stamping of it. And so the PCI Council, because there was still a lot of heat on the card brands to deal with payment fraud and payment theft. So they kind of had, that was the big incentive, was U.S. government threatening to regulate this. And they said, no, we can take care of this. It might have been more than just the U.S. government too. Payment fraud, stealing credit card numbers, payment data was pretty big in the early 2000s. But they jumped in and they created, what did they call it? I wrote down the name of it here, but basically it was like, they called it the Assessor Quality Management Program. And in addition to requiring this extra QA step once a ROC is finished to make sure the ROC was filled out correctly, which was done by the same firm that was doing the ROC, like it's still an internal function. They could still rubber stamp, but the incentive to do it correctly was you could get revoked. You could get your ability to do PCI assessments and sign ROCs revoked by the PCI Council, because the PCI Council would maintain a list of all the companies that could do PCI assessments and PCI work and had QSAs, and they would literally, your name would turn red or get crossed out. I forget exactly what it looked like, but you would very publicly get named and shamed for not doing PCI correctly. And without something like that for SOC 2s, what's going to stop it?
So PCI gets such a bad rap in our industry, such a superior program when compared to SOC 2. Like there's no comparison. You see actual enforcement of the rules. The scope is defined for you. You cannot choose the scope. Like you can incorrectly detect the scope, like both the auditee and the auditor. People make mistakes, but you can't choose like a gerrymander your scope to look your absolute best, which you can on SOC 2 or even on ISO 27001. You can't pick your controls. All controls are mandatory. And it's not entirely process focused. It's very much says like to the point of listing what are the accepted encryption algorithms, and they keep that list up to date. Whereas, hey, you just need to have a policy and a process and review what algorithms you're going to support, but they don't state, no, but these ones are unacceptable. And PCI does. So it's so much more strict and so much more clear what you have to do.
A data flow diagram, which is hard.
Yes.
Most companies struggle at this. It seems like every company should understand how data flows through their environment. I guarantee you, if you have not gone through this process, you don't know how data flows. And as a QSA, I'd be running Wireshark on servers and scanning file systems to validate that, yes, payment data is actually traveling through this server. 100% of the time, there would be mistakes. They'd be like, oh, right, that's how it used to work. This server is no longer used now. It now goes through this server. You'd be like, well, why is this server still running? Oh, it probably doesn't need to be. So, you just discover all this tech debt and just like kind of the gnarly, center of IT issues as you just dig into figuring out how payment data flows through this organization. And that's not even a requirement. That's like a prerequisite before you even get to the requirements.
Yes. So just what the scope is, where the requirements have to be met. The training. And I think a lot of this is because the organizations responsible for maintaining the standard and the program are themselves, they themselves tend to lose brand and even money, like the credit card brands, if there are a lot of incidents. So they are actually interested not in making money with the program, which is what the ICPA essentially is doing, like selling the licenses and qualifying people. They want this to work. So the incentives are very much different than in the case of SOC 2s or even ISO 27001, which is again much better than SOC 2. So the incentives are all wrong. And there was an amazing discussion around this topic on infosec.exchange on Mastodon, and especially on infosec.exchange, which is Jerry Bell's former CISO at IBM Cloud and podcast host of the Security Defensive podcast, Defensive Security podcast. You all should listen to it. It's amazing. And the guy from MITRE and you jumped in, and a few people jumped in. And one of the things I wanted to bring from that discussion is that, in theory, the reason SOC 2 exists is because prior to that, first parties were auditing their third parties individually and paying auditors to go and do that. And it was seen as like, okay, I'm going to do some cost savings. So instead of every first party, third party pair doing a different audit, which was some third parties continue to do that for more critical third parties, by the way. And it's a good thing they do. But the idea was we're going to have a certification body that's going to choose reputable assessors. And we are going to trust that they audit that third party once. And we're going to trust those findings in the SOC 2 report. If the assessors are not reputable, the whole system breaks. If this only works because people say, but I talked to so many third parties that actually went through the work, or you talk to third parties that, look, SOC 2 helped me improve, and I'm so happy to hear that. I'm happy people are driving some value off of it. But if this only worked with honest third parties, what's the point of having an audit? The whole point of having an audit is to catch the people that are not behaving well. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So you're rewarding the people that are misbehaving in that scenario. So what's the point, right? And that's kind of the thing that I hope TPCRM folks understand. Not because it's useless. If you have a third party that's you believe to have behaved well, this could help you expedite a few things. But it's not a proper assessment tool because it will not catch the bad guys. Like the people that are lying, the people that have poor security practices. It will not do that. You should focus on... Go ahead.
How much of this would be prevented if the SOC 2s were just published transparently? Like if you could just look at everybody's SOC 2, right? Kirchhoff's principle here, like a crypto system, you should be able to know everything about a crypto system except for the private key, and it still work. Like, I guess that's the only reason people don't, is they're worried, like, if they share too many details about how they do security, it'll make them easier to attack, which kind of goes against security by obscurity and Kirchhoff's principle. But you think that would help?
I think that's a little bit of the corollary of the with enough all eyeballs, all bugs are shallow principle of open source. Just because a software is open source and anyone can go in and audit doesn't mean anyone actually does. Right. Unfortunately, right? So it would allow an ecosystem of tools to consume that and start trying to make sense of things. So for example, if there was a public
database, just have an AI agent go out there and start comparing SOC 2s, right?
Just look
if
at
they're available.
Lots of copying and pasting, lots of duplicates, companies that have done multiple audits in a row because the results were not as good, and you could flag that. But technologies would have to be built around it and not be enough, but it would be a step. Again, the most important thing would be to only allow reputable companies and to have actual quality control of the assessments, even if it was crowdsourced, even if first parties that consume the reports could vote on how good the report was or bad. And then you could see a reputation score for each assessor, right? That would already help. Yeah. So, but as you said, that starts with the transparency, but unfortunately the transparency is not enough. That would be just the first step. Much better would be if the AI CPA, instead of requiring security assessors to be certified public accountants, actually had a separate program that required security expertise to be an assessor. If there was actual independent oversight of the quality of the testing methodologies, or even standardization of the testing methodology. When you train to be a PCI QSA, they tell you when you're going to audit their logs, this is the list of things you should be checking for. It's not up to every assessor to decide. That's not the case with SOC 2, or at least it's not enforced. Right? So as AJ said on the podcast, you can just say, hey, I talked to the CISO, he explained, and I trust him. You could say that and say, now I find that this control is in place because of that. Right? So there would have to be a lot more work to make this work, essentially, right? So I would say if there's a critical third party, don't trust the SOC 2. Either audit the third party yourself or find other automated ways, hint, hint, to actually check if the controls are implemented. Because that's the other thing that I think the SOC 2 leads us towards, and it's a tendency of GRC people in TPRM. We check the control design, not the control implementation. You see, what's the evidence? Oh, I have a policy, or this is how the process is designed. Sure, but is it actually implemented? Like if you have a process to ensure everyone is using 2FA, cool. But how many users actually have 2FA now?
So we've seen SOC 2s post breach, sometimes investigations, legal proceedings expose both the details of the breach and the SOC 2s. And I've seen, and I spent a lot of time looking at this stuff. We should talk about Power School next month because I'm not quite done reviewing all the investigation materials. But because that's one of the cases here where the SOC 2 was exposed. And we could see things that the SOC 2 said that they were doing, they were not doing because that's how the breach happened. And Power School's case, it was lack of MFA, credential stuffing on a contractor's account that had access to all customer instances.
Again, if Power School was allowed to choose the least stringent auditor in order to get a clean report, in order to win deals, that's incumbent on the AICPA to create a program where that's not a possibility.
Yeah.
And so until that is not fixed, this is useless as a tool, or very close to useless as a tool for TPRM.
All right, moving on to story number 3, which is maybe going to be a little bit shorter. I was looking for a third story to cover and looking for some interesting trends going on. And one of the trends I found was in Eastern Asia, in Japan and Korea. There's a lot of new regulations going in. Both got hit with some pretty big breaches. Asahi, which is a big alcohol brewing company. It's kind of like the Asian equivalent of it's not Anheuser-Busch anymore. It's now it's owned by
AB InBev. AB InBev.
Thank you. So yeah, it's one of those like there's a half dozen big beverage companies that make all the beverages in the world now. Everything's rolled up. And Asahi got hit pretty hard. It impacted operations. And so Japan has kind of stepped up their regulations there. And Korea has done it as well. SK Telecom, KT, Kopang all got hit in 2025. And both are kind of promising this active defense where the government will actually actively help out with some of these attacks. And they want to get notified as soon as these happen. And at least I think both of them have identified critical sectors and companies that are required to report their breach. Not just that they've had a breach, but like, here's all the details and here's how you can come in and actually help us with that. So, there's an expectation of sharing intelligence about like, okay, what do you know about the breach? Get us up to speed so we can jump in and have people on the federal side in the government actively help address that breach. So really interesting that this is the route that they're going in, and I think it's necessary. I hope that they collect this incident data. They do root cause analysis. They do some of these postmortems, and over time, I think this will allow them to leapfrog other countries. They'll have a much better understanding of how all these breaches are happening and what to focus on, what matters and what doesn't matter in cybersecurity.
And the thing that I haven't seen is they require the companies to notify the government, but I haven't seen an obligation from the government to make that information public, which would be amazing if they did.
Right.
Like where we have the, what was the name of the NTSB thing in the US that was discontinued? The cybersecurity review, CSRB, I think it was.
Yeah, CSRB. Mm-hmm.
It's the SRB, the
Cybersecurity Review Board. Yeah. Yeah, they were right in the middle of that Salt Typhoon investigation when it was cut.
Yeah. So if this information was then, even if redacted, was made public, I think it would be a huge boon to, again, to threat intelligence, to security planning, to defenders, because as we often discuss on this podcast, not a lot of details are published. I see some similarities and some differences between the motivations and the content of Korea's and Japan's legislation. Not that I have read the originals because I don't speak either Japanese or Korean, even though my company is in Japanese. I only, as an Aikido practitioner, I can count to 31, and anyone that's ever practiced Aikido knows exactly why. Um, but um, but I see Korea as being more like reactive. It's the government being pummeled by public opinion, finding a way to kind of punish companies that don't behave well, don't do proper security, in order to kind of answer public outcry over those very high-profile breaches. Whereas Japan, I see more of a geopolitical trend going on. I think it's a combination of Japan after World War II, like they have a pacifist constitution. They had very little investment, even in their own defense, even in kinetic aspects of it. And because of a succession of more hawkish prime ministers, and now Takayuki Sanai being the latest one, and the fact that we discussed at the beginning of the podcast that people are less and less confident on relying on the umbrella protection from the United States, or even if the protection is still there, they don't want to rely on it as much anymore, so that it can't be used as like political or economical leverage against them, like the threat of withdrawing that all of a sudden being used to say you have to make economic or political concessions to me, which was not a thing before. So I see this slow trend of Japan increasing their defense forces on a kinetic fashion, being more belligerent towards China and their neighbors, or at least more self-assertive. And now they're expanding that into the cyber domain. Haven't gone as far as having cyber offensive capabilities, but besides the breach reporting, they're now doing an NSA style like collection of network telemetry, even of foreign
Yeah.
traffic that is routed through the country, to have more cyber intelligence capabilities, right? Which they didn't have before. Probably again relying on the U.S. to help them with that, to provide the intelligence. Uh, in a sense, that could be a good thing, but it's also again a reflection of them feeling they have to do this because the other alternative is not as reliable anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, it's really interesting. The UK has talked about doing this as well. I don't know that they've actually done any of it, but they have talked about having choke points where the government can actively protect businesses. So a lot of discussion about that in other countries as well. And it's going to be interesting to watch what unfolds here. I think they're good moves. I think they make sense. And again, I think I mentioned it last episode. This is what I'm going to be talking about at RSA. The benefits of understanding how companies fail are transformative to the industry. For the longest time, we didn't have data. We didn't know how breaches happened. All that data was kept very, very private. And I think the only reason we have so much data now is because so many breaches are happening that we do have occasional government investigations, class action lawsuits, FTC complaints. There's the Power School one. A lot of the data is coming out of the privacy administrators in Canadian provinces. So now there are these kind of avenues and opportunities to get the real detail of what happened, how it happened. And only then do I believe that we can really make significant improvements to cybersecurity. We have to understand how failures happen, not just this thing wasn't patched, but what was the culture like? Why didn't it get patched? Like in Equifax, still a lot of people don't know that breach happened because they couldn't find struts in their environment. They failed. They tried really hard. There was actually a good effort there, but they did not possess the skill to find a small Java library in a giant, decades old corporate environment.
Asset inventory is hard, man. And to give the TPRM people some stake in your thing, it's not so much that we can learn what controls we can impose on our own environments, but the same way that we can run background checks on employees or contractors before we bring them in. If we had more disclosure legislation across the board for companies when they had material incidents, imagine you could do a proper background check of that company. What incidents have they had in the past? Did they impact the products or services I'm trying to buy from them? Were they caused by clear negligence on their part based on what controls they're now claiming to have? So it would be a lot better than asking them on a questionnaire, do you do this well? Well, if they had 5 incidents in the last 24 months, because they are not doing this well, that's a much stronger signal of what is actually working or not. It's not just a function of what the third party does. It's also about attacker interests, right? And luck sometimes. But still, it would be much more reliable data than anything on a SOC 2, just to tie that up with the previous conversation. But sadly, that doesn't exist, right? Unless your provider is a public company under the SEC or now under one of those increasingly more frequent disclosure legislations, and this data is spread all over the place. So that would be something I would try to do, to try to figure out all those places. Where do I find those disclosures, right? And try to use that as a stronger signal than anything that is based on self-reporting or any audit that was fully controlled by a third party. That's a much stronger signal you should be looking for. As a TPRM
I forgot mentioning one of Korea's new cybersecurity regulations is going to be a very GDPR-like punitive fine of up to 3% of annual sales for companies that have repeat breaches. Like, you get breached once, I think you get off without a fine, but you get breached again 6 months later, 12 months later, they're coming for some of your revenue.
Yeah, makes sense.
All right, and that's all we've got time for this episode of Alice in Supply Chains. Alexandre, thank you so much for joining me today. It's great to get back at it, and I'm looking forward to that episode we're going to do with Tony.
Likewise. Have a great month, everyone.
All right, if you liked what you heard and you're on a platform where you can like, subscribe, or leave a comment, please do so. We'd love to get your feedback. Stay safe and stay vigilant, and we'll see you again next month.